The dimension of anti-rationality. Anastasia, can it be that modern mankind actually does live in the dimension of anti-rationality that the dark-haired youth mentioned? And what exactly is anti-rationality? How can we see this in real life? Thought or information appears, and we need to assess its reality only through ourselves. But how can we assess it? By what means? If a person is living in the anti-rational dimension, then he will think in categories of anti-rationality. Yes, that is so, but rationality all the same remains within a person, although in a significantly smaller degree. And if you mentally appeal to it, it is activated, and then you can use it to help you identify anti-rational manifestations. For now, we will speak no more on this topic, Vladimir. For now, go take a stroll here around the glade, around the taiga, and reflect a bit. Here, in this spot, rationality and anti-rationality are in balance. But in you, they are not, and for that reason, help your rationality out, activate it from time to time. How do I activate it? Just mentally say within you, rationality, or better yet, rationality. I was left alone and tried to reflect from a position of rationality, and these are the conclusions I began to draw. The artificial world. Today's community of people lives in an artificial world, not a natural one. It created and slavishly serves it. We have created an artificial world and live artificial lives within it. The real natural world is to be found along the side of the asphalt roadways, along which modern mankind is rushing headlong towards an abyss. Artificial concepts have been implanted into the collective consciousness of modern people. Our scientists and educated researchers have, in their great wisdom, started to call modern medicine, which has existed only 200 years, traditional, while calling folk medicine, whose history is calculated in the hundreds of thousands of years, non-traditional. At the same time as they've begun referring to healers, and here I'm talking about real healers, who are well versed in the properties of medicinal plants, as charlatans. The result is that modern man ends up having to treat many diseases, ones that people just 100 years ago easily cured themselves of, at no cost, using herbs from their very own garden, using expensive pharmaceuticals on the advice of their doctor. Perhaps there should be two paths in medicine. We need to teach folk medicine in school and train specialists in medical schools. 80% of ailments can be cured using folk medicine, and this will significantly lower the burden on today's medical facilities, which will make it possible to substantially improve the quality of medical service. But to do this, we have to think in categories of rationality. Artificial plumbing systems. Mankind has buried millions of kilometers of metal pipes that they call plumbing systems in the ground. Colossal effort has been expended to manufacture these pipes and lay them in trenches. They require continual servicing and major overhauls, which come at the cost of people's hard labor. Meanwhile, the water that comes out of the faucets in our apartments ends up being unfit to drink. And besides that, we have a natural plumbing system in the natural world, by which I mean not just rivers, but groundwater aquifers as well. Living, healing water capable of filling millions of wells flow through the earth's veins there. The natural plumbing system requires no repairs, but what's more, it's capable of purifying polluted surface water and of saturating a vital product with minerals and other necessary substances. But the city person's modern way of life has deprived him of the opportunity to utilize the natural plumbing system that was designed and constructed by the Creator. The question arises, did man choose this way of life on his own, or under the influence of certain forces? In order to answer this question, let's take a look at one more case. We'd be hard-pressed to call it anything other than the mental illness of society. What steps must the average family in Europe, America, or Russia take in order to acquire their own apartment or home? The anti-rationality mortgage. For example, they're advised to take out a mortgage, or more precisely, they're advised to take out a loan from a bank for a period of 20 years or 30 years. acquire a modest residence with the bank's money, and then, every month over the course of 20 years, pay the money back to the bank with interest. If the family isn't able to pay the money back, the apartment will be taken away. A young family has to spend 20 years living in fear of losing their residence, and, as a rule, work at a job they don't like, just so they can get paid more, grovel at their boss's feet out of fear of losing their job. But perhaps there is no alternative to this kind of disconcerting situation. But there is, and that's not all. The alternative actually shows that obstacles that stand in the way of young people acquiring housing have been artificially implanted into their young heads. These obstacles are virtual and intrinsic only to virtual reality. I'll give you a totally typical real-life example. A young man named Andrei lived in the city of Vladimir. On the outside, he didn't look much different from his peers. He went to cafes and discos, he smoked and used alcohol. When he read about family homesteads, he began dreaming of his own land and home. He didn't have the funds to buy a plot of land and to buy a house, and his parents weren't in a position to offer him financial help. In 2001, a hectare of land on a deserted spot overgrown with tall grasses near the village of Konievo, 30 kilometers from the city of Vladimir, cost 30,000 rubles. Nearly 50 families from among my readers have acquired their own hectares in this deserted spot and begun putting up structures. People mostly in their middle years who possess some financial reserves. Andrei also took a liking to this spot on the bank of a forest lake, and there was still some free land left there. Driven by his dream of having his own homestead, he stopped frequenting the youth club scene, and by working hard was able to save up 30,000 rubles in the space of only 6 months, and acquire a hectare of land in the deserted spot. But where could he get the money to build a home? At that time, in the city of Vladimir, a square meter of housing cost 20,000 rubles, and thus, to build a home only 50 square meters in size, he would need an additional 1,000,000 rubles. Andrei wasn't about to take out a loan from a bank just so he'd have to spend 20 years paying it back with interest. At the age of 23, the young man went to the store, bought a good axe, and in the course of a year, all on his own, put up a wooden home on his plot. That's making a long story short. Here's some more detail. First, Andrei got a job in a company where there were master craftsmen who knew how to frame a log house. From them, he learned how to work with wood, while simultaneously earning the money to buy the logs for his future home. On this young man's plot, a garden is now growing. A well has been dug, there's a pond, and there's a wooden home, and people who are new arrivals to the settlement put themselves on the waiting list for him to build them log homes. Now Andrei is an acclaimed and respected master craftsman. You could say that through his own actions, Andrei saved 1,000,000 rubles, or that he earned them. I think that's not even important. He gained immeasurably more than 1,000,000. He gained confidence in his own abilities and a home built with his very own hands. I think Andrei will manage to find a worthy girl who will enter his home and bear him a son and daughter, and the children will tell their grandchildren who it was who built the home with his very own hands, who put in the garden, who established their small motherland. Andrei's story isn't the only one of its kind. In that same settlement, there are other families who have built their homes with their own hands. I remember how my father and grandfather also put up their own wooden home, and the neighbors next to them, my parents' peers, did the same thing. More than half a century has passed, but people still live in these houses, just as they did back then. And this is where questions come up. How could it happen that for a century society has been developing new building techniques, new materials, machinery, and devices which would seem to be more advanced, but in the end, the average family has to work hard for 20 to 30 years to get a dwelling that it used to be able to provide itself with in the course of a year or two? For many families, the housing question has become insoluble, and the government has had to take it up. Did the given situation come about by chance, or did someone artificially construct it? That, however, isn't important. The important thing is that the situation is absolutely anti-rational, but society, caught up in its everyday bustle, has turned out to be incapable of reflecting and analyzing. It has gotten used to the situation and can't imagine anything different. Society has gotten used to anti-rationality and is ceasing to be rational. Why does love go away? Man's modern way of life has given birth to a great many problems that we are strictly forbidden to discuss. And since they don't get discussed, they don't get solved either. Billions of domestic conflicts take place all over the world, and they can get to the point where spouses fight with and murder each other. In so-called civilized countries, up to 80% of young people who enter into marriage divorce soon afterwards. This process is preceded by negative emotions and stress of long standing, and children are made unhappy. Over the course of millennia, millions of localized wars have been going on practically all over the world between people who have attempted to establish a loving union. It isn't only both sides in these battles that take the cruelest of beatings, but their children too. This kind of situation has been presented to modern mankind as a given. It's natural, they tell us. Love comes and goes. But as it turns out, this kind of situation is characteristic only for people of the artificial world. It is not consistent with man's true nature. For the first time ever, the taiga hermit has shown that young people's initial attraction for each other is not love. It is but the urge to give birth to the great feeling which arises when three components are united. She identified these components and showed us 3 ancient rites that help real love be born. I have included them in previous books. I had to use the word rite because Russian lacks a more precise definition that expresses these rational acts by young people who feel attracted to each other and their parents. But the given topic, like many others, turned out to be forbidden for the mass media, and that's not all. They began using plausible pretexts to make efforts to slander the source. It got to the point that on a show called The Mysterious Anastasia on Russian Central Television's Channel 1, certain individuals began collectively declaring that people were going crazy from reading my books with the statements of the taiga hermit. Ludicrous! They don't go crazy from reading porn magazines or bloody thrillers or watching movies about violence, but they do from reading philosophical statements about love and man's way of life. This position makes it clear that there are forces in modern society that program social disasters. They target people and act through them, making use of their ignorance about what's really going on. And we can understand these people. Imagine what would happen if a person who's reading the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series starts asserting that by using 3 ancient rites, modern newlyweds can, during their marriage ceremony, in the space of 30 minutes and in plain view of all their relatives, create a family homestead on a deserted spot, along with a garden that will contain around 100 plantings necessary for the family sustenance, that they can erect a home with all the necessary farmyard structures, along with devoted animals that seem to have been settled in them as if by magic. Modern people who haven't read the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series might consider a person who asserts this fact crazy or gullible, but allow me to reveal a bit about this mechanism, the mechanism with whose help the given miracles really do occur. According to ancient rules or rites, you can call them what you want. A pair of young people who feel drawn to each other go out to the outskirts of the settlement, find themselves a plot of land no less than a hectare in size, and build a small hut there. Together, they create a detailed and thorough design for their future homestead. For all intents and purposes, they are also creating a space where the energy of love can be found. In their design, they indicate not only the spots where their future home and farmyard structures will be located, but also where absolutely all the plantings will go. Doing everything to create the design can keep them busy for anywhere from 3 months up to a year. Once the design is finished, they go around to all their relatives, on both the side of the bride and the groom, and invite them to participate in the rite of marriage. And each time they're at the home of this or that relative, they say, for example, "Ah, what a beautiful apple tree you have there." These words serve as a hint to the invited guest about what he should bring with him to the rite of marriage. In this particular case, a slip of the apple tree that the future newlyweds liked. To someone else they're inviting, they might say, for example, "What a feisty little goat you have there." That means the guest doesn't need to think about what gift to bring the young couple. He'll give them a goat, and so on. During the rite of the marriage, the newlyweds will tell their relatives and friends, as if they were taking some kind of great exam of life in their presence, all about the design they've created for their homestead, indicating in detail where everything should be located. Once they've finished the telling, they will give a signal, and the relatives and friends who have gathered together will set out their living gifts in precisely the spots indicated by the wedded couple. The newlyweds, all a kivier, will observe as their closest relatives and friends engage in the great joint action. Then the now married young couple, having experienced great inspiration and emotional elevation, will be led away, each to his parents' home, where they will spend 2 nights. In the space of this time, the relatives on the side of the bride and the groom will move previously readied structures to the spot. Piece by piece, at dawn on the second day, he and she will hurry to their newly created family homestead, to their first meeting as husband and wife. It is impossible to describe what will pass between them in their new home, full of nothing but positive emotions and an aspiration never before experienced, energy of love for each other and for their newly created space of love. What would have happened if the Wellspring people had told such newlyweds that there will come a time when marriage will be carried out in an entirely different way? That 2 young people will come to some building, sign their names in some ledger, and ride around in someone else's car that's been decorated with ribbons, all around a city that doesn't and never will belong to them. After that, along with their invited guests, they will take their seats at a table in some restaurant and eat food that wasn't prepared by their hands or by their relatives' hands, and drink vodka, and then the tipsy guests and relatives will shout, "Bitter, bitter," to them, demanding that they kiss each other in front of everyone. And that's it. Next comes the so-called marriage bed and the lack of any pleasant after effects from what has transpired. And what's more, any space that the energy of love can fill is totally lacking. Such a thing couldn't happen. It could never happen. The Wellspring people, newlyweds, will say, "Man is a rational being, not a crazed animal who would destroy love like that. Love that is just an embryo and hasn't yet grown strong." So, who is really going crazy? Judge for yourself, esteemed readers. To answer the question of why love goes away, we can say that real, full-fledged love simply doesn't come to the majority of modern newlyweds because there's no appropriate space for it. What is love? It is a feeling, a great energy that is capable of inspiring a person to create, and that increases his spiritual powers and capabilities. It is a rational energy. It fills the space where 2 people in love are present and creates a unified whole for them, a space of love. Take a look at what happens nowadays. The newlyweds go to their marriage bureau to formalize their marriage. The marriage bureau facility isn't their space, but simply a temporary spot where they're spending some time. And what's more, divorce proceedings take place in this very same facility, and the rational energy of love is unable to fill a space like that. Riding around in a car, often someone else's, also isn't fit for the energy of love. And it can't fill a modern apartment either, because after all, the energy of love can't caress soulless, dying objects. And in a modern apartment, even in a new one, everything is aging and disintegrating with each instant. Nothing is coming to life in it, and the energy of love can't make its peace with that kind of disintegration. When it's present in that kind of situation, it can't give its blessing. What is needed for the energy of love is a living space that's been established by people, in the given case by actual people who feel drawn to each other. It can't be any other way. The proof of this is the great number of secular divorce proceedings throughout the world. The question of why love goes away deserves to be studied from all angles, and I intend to devote my next book to this, a book in which I will tell of the ancient land where people knew the secret of everlasting love. Today's approach to love is truly anti-rational. Governing the government. There are various methods one can use to influence people. We're not excluding the government here either. And the most potent among them is the image. People grow accustomed to absurd conditions and images and accept them as givens. There's an image that tells us that the government, including the State Duma too, where laws are developed and enacted, must definitely be located in the center of a big city. We've gotten accustomed to it being this way. But does this make sense? Where did the prophets receive their revelations? And where did the wise men do their reflecting? Whence did they bring the divine laws? Moses, he received the tables with the 10 Commandments after going into seclusion on Mount Sinai. Christ, he went off into the desert for 40 days. Buddha, he spent several years deep in the forest. Muhammad, he spent months in seclusion in the cave of Hira on the mountain of Jabal al-Nur. Philosophers and scholars, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Kant, and Nietzsche, and many others have also spent years living in seclusion. But where is our State Duma's building located? Where do they write our laws, these wise men chosen by the people? Do you recall? Our State Duma's building is located at the intersection of busy highways. Could we possibly create more absurd working conditions for our national chosen ones? What do we have here? A roadside Duma? What causes empires to die out? I can cite a great many historical examples of images influencing human society and inducing planetary disasters. But for the contemporary person, particularly one living in Russia, the most obvious example will be the situation connected to the demise of the Tsarist Russia and, later on, the fall of the USSR. From a spark, a flame will burst forth, said the leader of the worldwide proletariat, B.I. Lenin. Speaking of the Bolshevik newspaper Spark, in which the Tsarist regime was smeared, all according to plan, a negative image of Tsarist rule took root, and a new, beautiful image was created, an image of Soviet rule. Tsarism was toppled, a new empire, the USSR, arose and began developing, an empire processing a huge army and equipped with nuclear weapons. But only 70 years later, the great empire of the USSR collapsed into several separate states, ones not always inclined to be friendly to each other. It was the politicians who had signed the agreement concerning the division, as well as the economic and political situation, that political scientists identified as the culprits in the collapse. When we take a closer look, we can see all of this too as simply the result of the action of images. Let's recall Solzhenitsyn's gifted books about the Gulag and the work of the other masters of the pen who smeared the USSR. Other writers at the same time were creating an image of the prospering Western states where, unlike in the USSR, store shelves were groaning beneath an abundance of all possible products, and happy and free people were riding around in fancy cars. And at the same time as they were speaking of the merits of Western civilization, they remained silent about the problems existing there. Russia's future is also defined using images that are taking root in the minds of the souls of the people living in the country. Unfortunately, this is a whole pleiad of images that are leading toward the annihilation of the state. The cult of violence and the cult of money are forming the image of destruction in thousands of movies in theaters and on television. Catching up to the West, that's what many of our politicians are propagandizing. No economic or military achievements and no calls to be patriots in our motherland are capable of opposing these images. The only thing that can oppose this image is a different image, an image of creation, an image capable of inspiring millions of people. And Anastasia has created it as a counterweight to the armadas of destructive images. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken up the image of a beautiful future country and have contributed in their own ideas to it and have begun making it a reality. They've begun building family homesteads. This grassroots initiative was in line with the government's plans. Many well-known politicians, government figures, well-known academics, cultural figures, and religious leaders have made positive statements about those who are building family homesteads. I'm not going to bring in their statements here, but anyone who wishes to do so can learn about them on the site anastasia.ru. Now, of course, these statements have inspired people, but they are nominally off the record, although they're also infinitely bold. After all, these rational words have resounded within the landscape of anti-rationality and penetrated it. Some of the Taiga Hermit's assertions might seem fantastical, and that's the way they seemed to me too when I first started spending time with her. Now, 15 years after my first meeting with her, there's much I've had to rethink. It's we, contemporary society, who live in a dwelling land that is fantastically and unnatural for living a rational life. Anastasia speaks about rational reality. She's establishing it methodically, and she will establish it. I will try to help her, and hundreds of thousands of people are already helping. And here's what else is interesting. In electronic and print media, literature, and the movies, there are practically no positive heroes who commune with the earth in a rational fashion. Call to mind the way of life and dwelling land of any main characters. For the most part, they're shown in apartments, offices, restaurants, casinos, on the streets of big cities, and in places like that. And if they do show a person who communes with the earth in a conscious way, and this happens extremely rarely, then this person is presented as immature, as an imbecile. Human society is methodically and persistently being indoctrinated about the kind of dwelling land where he should pass his life. Did this situation come about by chance? I think, and I am even more convinced, that it did not come about by chance. It is leading us toward a disaster, a personal, social, and planetary disaster. When I was talking with Anastasia later on, after I had done some thinking on my own, I said with certainty, I am absolutely convinced that contemporary mankind is living in the dimension of anti-rationality. It thinks in the categories of anti-rationality because it has no clear plans for how to construct a harmonious future. All it does is state the obvious, the fact that it is coming to an end, and speak about that. The year 2012. These days, the date of December 22nd, 2012, is being widely and actively discussed, both in esoteric circles and among scholars and on the internet. Many people believe that the world will come to an end on that day. Why are people talking specifically about this date? It's because this date is connected to a gloomy, apocalyptic prediction by the enigmatic ancient Mayans, according to whose calendar. And by the way, experts admit that the Mayan calendar is much more precise than the Gregorian calendar we now use. On this day, on December 22nd, 2012, the current cycle of the so-called long count, the era of the fifth sun, or the epoch of the jaguar, will come to an end. According to legend, The conclusion of epoch of the jaguar will be followed by years of death and destruction that will continue until the epoch of the renewal of mankind begins. Scholars recently ascertained that the date indicated in the Mayan calendar is significant astronomically. On this day, an event will occur that takes place only once every 25,800 years. The sun will come into alignment with the mystical, energetic center of the galaxy, and modern civilization will, for the first time, live through this rare astronomical phenomenon, or it won't live through it. It has been suggested that during the second millennia BCE, the Mayan forebears, whose monuments we encounter in Central America, came down from the mountains where they had been living into the tropical forests and plains of the Yucatan. It is precisely on the plains that the Mayan civilization achieved its greatest flowering. In the first millennium BCE, the Mayans knew how to write in hieroglyphs, and their math and medicine were at a very high level. They built stone cities and unbelievable ceremonial structures, such as the Great Palace at Palenque. And here's the main thing: they had a deep knowledge of astronomy. Up to the present day, no complete explanation has been found for the fact that the Mayan cities began to fall into disrepair long before the Europeans arrived. At the heart of the Mayan civilization's astrology lies the count of days, the basis for generally accepted astrology. The ancient Sumer and Babylon is the arrangement of the planets around the zodiac circle. The Mayans also knew the zodiac constellations, but their zodiac had 13 constellations, not 12. They included the constellation Serpentarius, which Mayans called the Bat, through which the sun passes for only a few days. Now, about the enigmatic calendar. The current cycle of time, which comes to an end in the year 2012, is measured starting from a very ancient date, the 13th of August in the year 3114 BCE. And this is rather strange because, as I've already noted, the culture of the Mayans themselves is a minimum of 1,000 years younger than that. Experts who study Mayan culture have not been able to reach consensus about how their famous calendar came into being. It has been suggested that the Mayans acquired the calendar, along with their written language, from the Olmecs, whose culture has a more ancient history. And actually, archaeologists have made finds on the territory of the ancient Olmec settlement at La Venta that confirm a certain continuity or interconnection between those cultures. But what's more interesting is something else. When scholars took a look at comparative chronology, then it became clear that certain momentous events from the past of human civilization fully coincide with the beginning of the current cycle of the Mayan calendar, the 3114th year BCE. Thus, it is roughly at this time that the mysterious megalithic structures of Stonehenge begins to be constructed. Written language appears in Mesopotamia. In Egypt, following the unification of the Upper and Lower Kingdoms and the founding of the Fortress of the White Wall, Memphis in Greek, ruling dynasties are formed. In America, they begin cultivating maize. One gets the impression that precisely at that time a global cultural revolution took place across the whole planet, and that people acquired new knowledge under the influence of certain external forces. According to one of the theories, priests, shamans, and holy men of that time came into contact with some repository of secret knowledge during their meditations. Of course, the predictions of the Mayan culture, the well-known prophecies, and official sources that speak of a planetary disaster are worthy of attention. Even so, it's each thinking person alive today who can make the most important and reliable reckoning about the future. Let's try to analyze in what direction changes in the ecological situation in Russia are tending. Let's take the time span of just the last 50 years. The majority of the country's population began living in big and middle-sized cities. People in the big cities have ended up without good quality drinking water. As if that weren't enough, people have started to pay for their most life-sustaining products. 50 years ago, a situation like this would have seemed simply fantastical to society. Today, society has gotten used to it, and it shouldn't have done so. Water is a requirement for everything, and if society agrees to the ever greater pollution of water, then it does not have the right to exist. It isn't someone up on high who's sentencing man to this, but man himself. I'm canceling the predicted hell on earth. This phrase was uttered by the taiga hermit Anastasia. I think it's useful for the majority of people living on earth to utter similar words and to perform acts that correspond to these words. Today, this is a matter of life and death. Many people living on the planet Earth are taking note of the negative results of global warming. Scientists are spreading the word about changes in the Earth's geomagnetic field and about the flooding of entire continents in the not-so-distant future. Such large-scale disasters have begun occurring right before our contemporaries' very eyes, like the one in Indonesia, where more than 200,000 people perished, and in the USA, where New Orleans, a city with a population of 1 million, was flooded. Scientists are also spreading the word about impending changes in the sun's activity. Questions about the ecological safety of the Earth have arisen so keenly that they were included in the UN agenda in 2007 at England's initiative. At the beginning of 2008, they were considered by Russia's Security Council. For the first time, assertions by those forecasting a global disaster began to dovetail with the way contemporary scientists and the leadership of many states viewed this topic. The priests of the Mayan civilization also spoke about how a global disaster would occur, and that it would take place in 2012. Many people have heard about this to one degree or another, but even so, public conversations about the 2012 disaster touch on only a small portion of what is spoken about in talks behind closed doors. It's only by hearsay that we can actually guess that the Japanese government is taking steps to resettle its population. According to the forecasts, England will be one of the first to be flooded, and evidently, that's why it was the one to initiate the inclusion of ecological questions in the agenda for the meeting in the UN Security Council. It's possible that the governments of various countries are acting correctly by not publicizing the current situation widely and in detail. Why so panic in the people? But on the other hand, the majority of a population might perish because they're out of the loop. And if that's the case, then only the informed elite would be able to save themselves, taking 100 or 200 slaves along with each one of them. Scientists are making predictions about which countries will be swallowed up by the elements, the way Atlantis was, and which ones won't be subject to flooding. In Russia, for example, the coastal regions will be flooded, and Siberia will end up being the best place to live. Following global warming on the Earth, an ice age will ensue. But what difference does it make what kind of global disaster comes about if society is in no condition to withstand the disastrous phenomena we already have today, such as the fumes that contaminate the air in the cities, the electromagnetic radiation that penetrates our dwellings, and many others? Is there an alternative to mankind's sad future? Of course there is, but all in good time. And so, at world forums, they've come to a clear conclusion. It is possible that a disaster will occur in coming years. And so, here's where an interesting question arises. Are leaders, the wealthy, and science capable of taking some kind of measures to avert it? Representatives of global science have been unable to answer this question. The governments of various countries, in an effort to affect the situation in some way, developed the so-called Kyoto Protocol, according to which all countries would be required to reduce harmful emissions into the atmosphere. Thus far, the protocol has remained unratified by many countries. What might happen in the future does, of course, cause us worry. But shouldn't the disastrous situation that's already playing out today, the situation masquerading as the triumph of civilization, cause us even greater worry? The man-eating octopus. The picture that Anastasia, or the dark-haired youth, showed, in which people build their homes along the stinking tentacles of a man-eating monster, is not fiction at all, but the truest reality. A reality to which people have grown so accustomed that they accept it as a given. And the monster exists still and is growing in size. It is our roads and what moves along them. Information about this is available to everyone. We know, for example, that the length of the world's major paved highways exceeds 12 million kilometers, which is, for purposes of comparison, 300 times the length of the Earth's equator, which extends for approximately 40,000 kilometers. The length of air traffic routes approach 6 million kilometers. Railway tracks are 1.5 million kilometers long. Major pipelines stretch for roughly 1.1 million kilometers, and interior waterways for more than 600,000 kilometers. The length of sea lanes equals many millions of kilometers. If we turn to the problem of pollution of the atmosphere by various means of transportation, then automobiles' share would make up 85%. And you know the problem here isn't limited to harmful gases. We shouldn't forget about such unfavorable ecological factors as noise and vibration. So, 80 decibels, which is about the noise level on a busy city street, already has the potential to harm one's hearing. And the development of various means of transportation and the laying down of highways doesn't promote psychological health either. And here, too, these factors directly or indirectly affect not only drivers and passengers, but also the many people who are outside the means of transportation and communication lines. Crammed roads, sitting for many hours in traffic jams, the fact that sometimes it is impossible even to simply cross the road. All of this sharply heightens nervousness, leads to chronic stress and increased aggression, and sometimes drives people to acts they not only never would have committed, but couldn't even imagine themselves capable of committing, had they been in some other place. Yearly surveys of the condition of the natural environment in the various regions of our country eloquently expires the acute nature of the problem of the ecological safety of all Russian big cities without exception. And experts unanimously recognize the intensifying process of the automobilization of society as the fundamental reason that regions' levels of ecological safety has decreased. Even now, medical personnel are already testifying that ecological stress caused by the automotive and transportation system costs the average resident of a large city in Russia 4 to 5 years of his life. Here we're talking about people, and a person, after all, can not only perceive a problem, but articulate it too. But what about the Earth, for example? Although the Earth can also articulate a problem too in its own way, it's just that amidst the noise and the clatter and fumes of our lives, are we still capable of hearing the Earth's voice? What specifically is it about the automotive and transportation system that is killing the Earth? First of all, you need actual Earth when you're building transportation lines, just as you need water and air. In the USA, for example, there's a statistic that the amount of land that highways, railways, and airports occupy equals 101,000 square kilometers, while cities occupy 109,000 square kilometers. In Russia, the length of roads is greater than 500,000 kilometers. Well, roads are built on the land. What's the problem? The problem is that when the roads, pipelines, and airports are built and used, the soil is destroyed. You get landslides and sinkholes, and erosion advances, And then you get gullies that run along the ruts in dirt roads and grow wider, which exacerbates the situation even more. The further you go, the more happens. A large expanse of land alongside highways, railways, and the oil and gas pipelines that come out onto the surface is polluted with a combination of lead, sulfur, petroleum products, and other substances. Experts rank as most dangerous the strip of land that extends 200 meters outward along both sides, runs of the busiest highways. This is the reason it is expressly prohibited to grow agricultural products, collect mushrooms and berries, and graze livestock, especially milk producers, along the sides of roads. There are known cases of children being poisoned by the milk of cows that have grazed around roads. Near roads, the layer of air near the ground, up to a meter above the surface, is also devastatingly polluted, with dust consisting of particles of asphalt, rubber, and metal. You'll find lead in it, along with other substances that possess carcinogenic and mutagenic functions. Those who are fond of taking a stroll or jogging along the roadside should give this some thought, and one should be particularly mindful of this when taking walks with little children. After all, when they're in a stroller or walking, they're passing right through this hazardous zone. And here's something else I'd like to add. Please note that the greatest number of harmful roadways is concentrated not in the desert or in Antarctica, but in places with the greatest concentrations of people. And huge cities and metropolitan areas take pride in their killer, multi-lane ring highways. When putting their budgets together, all governments include major financing for constructing and repairing highways. What else could they do? After all, if there were no roads, the residents of the metropolitan areas might be left without food and medication. Roads are the blood vessels that provide a person living in a metropolitan area with everything he needs. Stop. What we've got here is some kind of gibberish. It truly is rampant anti-rationality. The blood vessels, which, it would seem, we can't do without, are in truth delivering us to a slow death. Ah, what spiritual, well-educated, and intelligent people we want to seem to be. But if we leave monsters like this to the new generation, that means we are handing our very own children over to be ripped to pieces. Who does that make us in that case? And there seems to be no way out of the current absurd situation. But it only seems that way. There is a way out, and it lies in the way we live, both individual person and society as a whole. The exhaust gases from millions of cars, the smokestacks of giant and small companies, and other sources that belch out harmful pollutants are but an effect, and not of the cause that gave birth to them. The cause lies in the anti-rational, technocratic way of life. Yes, you've understood correctly, Vladimir. There's just one thing I don't get. If every person can think up an image and the image begins to exist, then how much information do we have to sift through in order to come up with what's genuine? Not much at all. Certainly, every person can think up an image, but people will not accept every image with their whole heart and soul. Not at all. Well, yes, of course, not every image. Really, thank you, Anastasia. It's interesting what you have to say about the image. Tell me something else about the image. What's your opinion? What is it? Man himself is, in fact, an image that has taken material form. And since he is a materialized image, man himself can use his thought to create and can materialize images. This is where his universal power, a power unsurpassed by no one and no thing, lies. If this or that person doesn't recognize the capabilities within him that have been given him by the Creator, then that person himself blocks his lofty power and falls under the influence of other images and materializes their thoughts, until finally he destroys himself, his family line, his state, and the whole planet. The artificial, technocratic world was also created by man using the energy of an image suggested to man by his antipodes. The technocratic world is fragile and transitory. Even the most advanced car, building, or any other object of the official world disintegrates with each second, and within but a few years turns to dust, or worse still, into waste products harmful for man. Man himself, by living in the artificial world, becomes fragile and transitory as well. For it is hard for a person who spends each minute looking at a multitude of disintegrating objects that lack autogenic capacity to imagine eternal life, create the image of his own eternity, and materialize it. The natural world that is visible to us has existed not for billions of years, but for significantly longer. For at the beginning it already existed within as yet non-materialized image. The scientists who determined the Earth's age calculated not the date of its birth, but merely the date of its materialization as one of the stages of its life. The natural world possesses the capability for autogenesis, and this capability renders it eternal. The Creator, who created eternity, as himself the very same. He is Alpha and Omega, the Alpha once more. A great many people might say or think, what was there before the birth of the Creator and of his extraordinary multitudinous energies? At one point in time, nothing existed, nothing. But recall what the Creator said about nothing to his Son. Out of nothing will arise the beautiful new birth of you and of the aspiration reflecting your soul and dreams. My Son, you are infinite, eternal. Within you lie your creating dreams. But if out of nothing arises something, this means that nothing, too, takes part in the birth. My giving birth out of nothing in part. The Creator completed the circle and presented to man the image of eternity. The knowledge, understanding, and perception of the energy of the image within him enable man to not die, but rather to drift off in an ambrosial sleep. Upon awakening, he incarnates in the spot, time, and image necessary to him and created by him before his sleep. Gaining knowledge of the science of imagery leads to understanding the entire universe created by the Creator, and to the creation of new and beautiful worlds. Lack of knowledge and understanding of the science of imagery leads unavoidably to unskillful interaction with the perfected natural world and to the creation of an artificial, primitive, unnatural world. Lack of knowledge of the science of imagery turns entire states and peoples into puppets, into chess pieces in the hands of those who are acquainted with this great gift. But Anastasia, after all, images can be positive and negative. How are we supposed to figure out which of them bears useful information and which is misinforming us, perhaps for personal gain? Through your own self, Vladimir, and through your own image, you will discern the value of any information. You mean every person has an image? Why, of course, Vladimir. Every person has his own image. Each differs strikingly from the others. Were every person to preserve his primeval image, then tell me, Vladimir, how would the world look now? Primeval? That means every person has or used to have a primeval image? What was it like? Divine, such is the way our parent, the Creator, did create it in his inspired impulse. It, our primeval image, was it God or what? It was the Son of God, and so it remains. But where is this primeval image of man gotten to? Where's this? Family Homestead Declaration. Declaration of my family homestead. Draft. I, a citizen of the Russian Federation, have familiarized myself with the philosophy of a way of life that has been set forth in fictional form in the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series. The idea of creating a family homestead has inspired me to take action. I have acquired a plot of land in a deserted spot out in the country, 1 hectare in size, with the goal of establishing a more perfected dwelling land for my family and my descendants, and in memory of our ancestors. I gave the given spot the name Family Homestead. On the land I acquired, I have laid out a garden, dug a pond where fish will breed, and established several families of bees. I cultivate berries and vegetables. I plan to fertilize the land using solely natural and native means of fertilization. I believe that it will be a positive development if a large number of families who have the skill and desire to work the land and who establish their daily lives on family homesteads located around large and small cities are able to provide urban populations with a large quantity of ecologically pure vegetable produce and improve ecological conditions in the provinces. I consider it unacceptable that tens of millions of hectares of land in our country are not cultivated and are overgrown with tall weeds. At the same time as we purchase 60% of our food products from foreign countries, and that in addition these products are also often of low quality and are harmful to humans, especially children. I believe that this situation not only threatens the safety of food in our country, but also destroys the populaces living within its territories. I believe that under such conditions, it is counterproductive to accuse the government or anyone else of having made this or that mistake. Our entire society has made mistakes, and not only our country's society. As a result, the societies of many countries stand on the brink of social disruptions. In the current situation, it is essential for each person to think about what concrete steps he personally can take in the very near future to bring about positive changes. The example of countries that have placed their bets on farm economy shows the ineffectiveness and even destructive nature of this choice. Farmers who focus on earning a profit from growing agricultural products enter into a competitive battle with each other. In order to prevail, they must use pesticides and herbicides to raise harmful, genetically modified crops. And by doing this, they endanger the lives of people of entire states. On the family homestead, a family lives and grows produce to meet its own needs and the needs of its relatives who live in the cities. Thus, a family living on a family homestead has a fundamentally different relationship with the land. The surplus produce from the homesteads will differ from all the other produce that appears on the shelves of city stores in its beneficial nature. The intensifying worldwide economic crises creates the threat of social disorder in many countries. If we are to come out of this crisis, we must have a fundamentally new philosophy of a family way of life, one that people will understand. And such a philosophy has been set forth in the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series. I have accepted its fundamental concepts, and they have inspired me to take the actions laid out above. More than 100 families in which children are being born and raised in more perfected ecological setting, each have acquired 1 hectare of land and are already building their own family homesteads alongside my own family homestead. Practice has shown that they're doing so not because of some infusion of capital, but because of this philosophy. I'm aware that thanks to this philosophy, tens of thousands of families in various regions of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are already building their family homesteads. Millions of families are planning to do so as a more favorable legislative basis, for this is established. Many families are planning to become small business owners and produce agricultural products. I fully support efforts by the government and President of the Russian Federation to create favorable conditions for building small houses outside the cities, and to also make lands designated for agricultural use available for the construction of small houses, and to allocate each family a plot of land. I believe that each plot should be not less than 1 hectare in size, since on a smaller plot, it's impossible to establish a comparably perfected and self-sustaining ecosystem and small-scale agriculture. If families are not allocated a large enough plot of land, the settlements around the cities will turn into consumers instead of producers, which will only exacerbate the food, ecological, and social situation in the country. I consider it essential for us to urgently ask the government and President of the Russian Federation to speed up their work in this direction and adopt the necessary law regarding family homesteads. I appeal to the President and Congress of the United States of America, to the UN, and to the heads of all states who have vested interest in the flowering of people's lives in them, and recommend they examine and embrace the idea that creating family homesteads is the most effective plan for enabling countries to come out of the global economic crisis, avert the approaching ecological catastrophe, and avoid a food crisis. A significant portion of the peoples of Russia see the family homestead plan as a national idea. May it become an international national idea, and may our countries compete with each other to make the beautiful future a reality. If the governments of various countries sincerely understand this idea, publicize it, and support it, then the depression that is advancing on us can be stopped. An inspired, constructive international process will begin. The actions of thousands of Russian families have already proven the positive influence of the family homestead plan. More than 1,500 Russian families who have already begun building their own family homesteads have signed declarations like this one. We continue to collect signatures. I wish all like-minded people success and inspiration as they creatively build a beautiful environment where their families can live in various countries and in the world as a whole. Signature of the founders of the family homestead. With the passage of time, this document, which has already taken on a life of its own, began to give rise in me to an ever-growing feeling of significance. I was getting the feeling that it's not a passport, a diploma, or any awards that constitute a person's most important documents, but precisely this kind of declaration. Returning in my mind to this document again and again, I kept trying to understand why I was having these feelings. The text and language might vary, but they aren't what's most important here. What's most important is the essence. I read the declaration to Anastasia, told her about my feelings, and asked, "What do you think, Anastasia? Why do these feelings arise, and not only in me? I've spoken with many people, and they also experience the feelings that the declaration is very significant, but no one can explain why that happens. Why is it? You see, Vladimir, the feelings that this document is significant immediately arose in me also. But like you and these others, what about it makes me feel that way? I am unable to explain that immediately. Perhaps we need to ponder it a bit together." "Perhaps, but I've already pondered it a great deal. The feeling that it's significant remains, but I still haven't understood why that is." Suddenly, Anastasia drew herself up somehow and began to shine. She began speaking, pronouncing each syllable distinctly, just the way she always did when she was trying to emphasize something significant. "Vladimir, I think I am beginning to understand where its great significance lies. Look, when the Creator was creating the earthly world, before the great creation, He first gave voice to His intention. He imparted it to all the entities of the universe, and when they asked, 'What is it you so fervently desire?' He replied, 'Co-creation and joy for all who behold it.' But can it really be so important to impart your intentions to everyone? Of course, it is very important, for imparting it to all means, above all, imparting it to yourself as well. It means comprehending what is taking place and believing in it yourself. Besides, having declared your intentions in words, you are already materializing them. By imparting them to all, you can call upon them to join you in co-creation. Why do I need to call upon everybody? I mean, somebody might laugh at me, or oppose me, or be indifferent. Derision, opposition, and indifference will be participants in the co-creation from the other side. They are needed to fill out this creation, within which you will bring everything into balance. I'm feeling an excitement inside, Anastasia. Where is that coming from? Vladimir, I too feel excited. This document has appeared as a herald of a new era on Earth. The aspirations of the people who stand behind it are holding within them a great realization. For thousands of years, people lived without determining their own lives, what they were striving for and why. What should the new generations carry forth? What should they bear in mind? Should they bear in mind where those paths went wrong? Which paths? Amidst the bustle of life, women gave birth to children, but they offered no goals in life to those they bore. Their children knew not what they were to carry forward, and they would die, the earthly civilizations, having lived out their empty lives. Only pottery shards remained of them, and arrowheads. The children would heed others' opinions of their parents. And what your grandfather wanted of life, Vladimir? He did not impart this to your father and mother in words, nor did they impart that to you in words. You are their continuation. Tell me, what kind of continuation did they want in life? I don't know. I can only imagine. You can imagine whatever you might like, but you know for sure that they did not impart it, their life's aspirations. Of course they didn't. Nor do all the other people I know. For the first time in perhaps billions of years, as if awakening at dawn, a man has said, I have an aspiration. I will begin my creation, and my generations will live in a promised land around them. And they will perfect the promised land around them. Of course, they will be more perfected than I, but I will begin it all, and a little part of me will live on in my descendants. You can cite many examples of how that which we do not impart in words dies along with the physical body. A man was thinking about how he might improve for his descendants the land where he lived, and he planted a cedar tree on his plot. Before long, the man died. 29 years passed, and the tree grew into a beautiful spreading cedar, 15 meters tall. Within but a year, it would have borne marvelous healing fruit. But people, the children of the man who had planted it, cut it down. They thought, why do we need this tree here? It casts a shadow over part of our plot, and its shade is keeping the tomatoes and cucumbers from growing in their beds. And they cut down the spreading cedar, and they cut it down precisely because the man had not given voice to his intentions. Genghis Khan conquered nearly half the world and brought Russia, India, China, and Palestine together beneath his rule, so that there would be no war. He built roads, lowered taxes, and honored the traditions and cultures of various peoples. But he himself lived not in the palaces he had seized, but in a yurt. He sought to bring wise men from all over the world to him. Together with these wise men, he talked about how they could go about making people happy, and how to help everyone come to know eternity and immortality of peoples. Of all conquerors of the earth, his empire endured the longest. He knew something. He attained and displayed it, but the empire collapsed all the same, and Genghis Khan has come down to us through the ages as just a conqueror. Who from among those alive today is able to say what his true intentions were? He didn't give voice to them. Well, perhaps they were just destroyed or are preserved in scrolls somewhere now. Intentions should be preserved not only in scrolls, but in the hearts of the people. Genghis Khan wasn't able to give voice to them so that they would be passed from generation to generation through the ages. Those are striking examples. It's amazing why, for millions of years, didn't people attach any particular importance to the need to give voice to their lives? Now I'm thinking the same thing, that this document presages a new era. Tell me, Anastasia, how will you give voice to your aspirations, both before people and yourself? Why, all of my aspirations are already laid out in your books, Vladimir. If I were to add anything else specific, I'd say, I will gather together the best sounds from the whole universe and will embed them into combinations of letters and into musical notes. I will ask today's poets, you, Vladimir, and the bards to give voice to them. A great many people will sense them with their souls. Let people express them in a language they understand. Let them model the dawn of the earth and its beautiful flowering. And when the melodies of man's worthy land embrace the entire earth, then I, amongst our kind neighbors, will help our grandchildren create their homesteads, and all the while I will not forget my own family space. But what should I say to myself, and how should I voice my own declaration before people? Each person needs to consider that on his own. Yes, of course, each person on his own. Even this draft I already have resonates with me. I'll think on my own about what I can add to make it my own. I'll ask all the readers to consider it too. This document is essential. It is an important missive from the founders of a family homestead to the future generations of their family line. It is a directive that comes from the people and goes to those at all levels of power, a communication with them. It will be a good thing if each family keeps a beautifully designed document like this, like a kind of relic alongside the family book of the family's homestead founders or those who intend to found one. A person will read it with awe and gratitude in his family's homestead's beautiful garden even 100 years later, and he will read it and recall the founder. And another person 100 years later, a person who has lost his way in life's whirlwind, will suddenly come across it as he's looking through his parents' old things and will read about their unfulfilled intentions. And the person will have a burning desire to make them a reality. And I think it would also be useful to send this kind of document to each member of local governments personally and to the UN. Similarly, I consider it essential to establish a yearly scientific and practical conference called Family Homesteads of the Future under the auspices of the UN.